Hello and welcome to our podcast. And this week at London Visited, we go to the area of London that was known as Tyburn. I'm going to tell you all about this historic part of London. My name is Steve, and each week I'll bring to you the facts, history and information about different parts of this great capital. If you've been to London, are planning on visiting, live here or just love London from afar, then this is definitely the podcast for you. This week's podcast is a request, as we have mentioned this area a number of times before in previous episodes. So, if you would like to request a place to be featured on a future podcast, then details of how you can contact us are at the end of the podcast. Also, don't forget to visit our YouTube channel, London Visited, to see videos covering places and history across London. I'd also like to say a massive thank you for listening to this episode. The numbers of you joining us each week continue to increase, and I just wanted to say it's massively appreciated. So a big thank you. And now to this week's podcast. Tyburn, which was a manor in the county of Middlesex, is one of two which was served by the parish of Marylebone. The parish, probably therefore also the manor, was bounded by Roman roads to the west, which is now the modern Edgware Road, and to the south, which is now where Oxford Street is. The junction of these was the site of the famous Tyburn Gallows, now occupied by Marble Arch. For this reason, for many centuries the name Tyburn was synonymous with capital punishment, it having been the principal place for execution of London criminals and convicted traitors, including many religious martyrs. It was also known as God's Tribunal in the 18th century. Tyburn took its name from the Tyburn Brook, a tributary of the River Westbourne. The name Tyburn, from Tyburn, means boundary stream. The Tyburn Brook should not be confused with the better known River Tyburn, which is the next tributary of the River Thames to the east of the Westbourne. We'll cover that later in this podcast. The Manor of Tyburn, along with neighbouring Lisson, was recorded in the Domesday Book of 1086 and were together served by the parish of Marylebone, its name after the stream St Marylebone, being a contradiction of St Mary's Church by the Bourne. In the 1230s and 1240s, the manor was held by Gilbert de Sandford, the son of John de Sandford, who had been the chamberlain to Eleanor of Aquitaine. In 1236, the City of London contracted with Sir Gilbert to draw water from Tyburn Springs, which he held to serve as the source for the first piped water supply for the city. The water was supplied in lead pipes that ran from where Bond Street Station stands today, 1 mile east of Hyde Park, down to the hamlet of Charing Cross, along Fleet Street and over the Fleet Bridge, climbing Ludgate Hill by gravitational pressure out to a public conduit at Cheapside. Water was supplied free to all comers. The junction of the two Roman roads had significance from ancient times and was marked by a monument known as Oswald's Stone, which gave its name to Oswald's Stone 100 of Middlesex. The stone was covered over in 1851 when Marble Arch was moved to the area, but it was soon afterwards unearthed and propped up against the arch. It has not been seen since 1869. Although executions took place elsewhere, notably on Tower Hill, generally related to treason, the Roman road junction at Tyburn became associated with the place of criminal execution, mostly after they were moved there from Smithfield in the 1400s. Prisoners were taken in public procession from Newgate Prison in the city, via St Giles in the Fields and Oxford Street, then known as Tyburn Road. From the late 18th century, when public executions were no longer carried out at Tyburn, they occurred at Newgate Prison itself and at Horsemonger Lane Gaol in Southwark. The first recorded execution took place at the site next to the stream in 1196. William Fitz-Osbert, populist leader who played a major role in the 1196 popular revolt in London, was cornered in the church of St Marylebone. He was dragged naked behind a horse to Tyburn, where he was hanged. In 1537, Henry VIII used Tyburn to execute the ringleaders of the Pilgrimage of Grace, including St Nicholas Tempest, one of the northern leaders of the pilgrimage and the king's own bow-bearer of the Forest of Bowland. In 1571, the Tyburn tree was erected near the junction of today's Edgware Road, Bayswater Road and Oxford Street, 200 metres west of Marble Arch. The tree, or triple tree, was a form of gallows, consisting of a horizontal wooden triangle supported by 3 legs, an arrangement known as the three-legged mare, or three-legged stool. Several criminals could thus be hanged at once, and so the gallows were used for mass executions, such as on the 23rd of June 1649, when 24 prisoners, 23 men and 1 woman, were hanged simultaneously, having been conveyed there in 8 carts. After executions, the bodies would be buried nearby or in later times removed for dissection. The crowd would sometimes fight over a body with surgeons, for fear that the dismemberment would prevent the resurrection of the body on Judgment Day. The first victim of the Tyburn tree was John Story, a Roman Catholic who was convicted and tried for treason. A plaque to the Catholic martyrs executed at Tyburn in the period 1535 to 1681 is located at 8 Hyde Park Place, the site of the Tyburn Convent. Among the more notable individuals suspended from the tree in the following centuries were John Bradshaw, Henry Ireton, and Oliver Cromwell, who were already dead but were disinterred and hanged at Tyburn in January 1661 on the orders of the Cavalier Parliament in an act of posthumous revenge for their part in the beheading of King Charles I. The gallows seem to have been replaced several times, probably because of wear, but in general the entire structure stood all the time in Tyburn. After some acts of vandalism, in October 1759 it was decided to replace the permanent structure with a new moving gallows until the last execution in Tyburn, probably carried out in November 1783. The executions were public spectacles which attracted crowds of thousands. Spectator stands provided deluxe views for a fee. On one occasion, the stands collapsed, reportedly killing and injuring hundreds of people. This did not prove a deterrent, however, and the executions continued to be treated as public holidays, with London apprentices being given the day off for them. One such event was depicted by William Hogarth in his satirical print, The Ideal Prentice Executed at Tyburn, 1747. Tyburn was currently invoked in euphemisms for capital punishment. For instance, to take a ride to Tyburn, or simply go west, was to go to one's hanging. Lord of the Manor of Tyburn was the public hangman. Dancing the Tyburn jig was the act of being hanged. Convicts would be transported to the site on an open ox cart from Newgate Prison. They were expected to put on a good show, wearing their finest clothes and going to their deaths with insolence. The crowd would cheer a good dying, but would jeer any displays of weakness on the part of the condemned. On the 19th of April 1779, clergyman James Hackman was hanged there following his 7th of April murder of courtesan and socialite Martha Ray, the mistress of John Montague, 4th Earl of Sandwich. The Tyburn Gallows were last used on the 3rd of November 1783, when John Austin, a highway, was hanged. For the next 85 years hangings were staged outside Newgate Prison. Then, in 1868, due to public disorder during these public executions, it was decided to execute the convicts inside the prison. The site of the gallows is now marked by 3 young oak trees that were planted in 2014 on an island in the middle of the Edgware Road, at its junction with Bayswater Road. Between the trees is a roundel with the inscription, "The site of the Tyburn tree." It is also commemorated by the Tyburn Convent, a Catholic convent dedicated to the memory of martyrs executed there and in other locations for the Catholic faith. Although most historical records and modern science agree that the Tyburn Gallows was situated where Oxford Street meets Edgware Road and Bayswater Road. In January 1850, issue of Notes and Queries, the book collector and musicologist Edward Francis Rimbold published a list of faults he had found in Peter Cunningham's 1849 Handbook of London, in which he claimed that the correct site of the gallows is where 49 Connaught Square later was built, stating that, in the lease granted by the Bishop of London, this is particularly mentioned. Tyburn was primarily known for its gallows, which functioned as the main execution site for the London area prisoners from the 16th through to the 18th century. For those people found guilty of capital crimes who could not get a pardon, which accounted for approximately 40%, a probable destiny was to be hanged at Tyburn. Other contemporary methods of punishment that may have been used as alternatives to Tyburn included execution, followed by being hung in chains, where the crime was committed, or burning at the stake, and being drawn and quartered, of which the latter two, which were common in cases of treason. The last days of the condemned were marked by religious events. On the Sunday before every execution, a sermon was preached in Newgate's chapel, which those unafflicted with the execution could pay to attend. Furthermore, the night before the execution, around midnight, the sexton of the church adjacent to Newgate recited verses outside the wall of the condemned. The following morning, the convicts heard prayers, and those that wished to do so received the sacrament. On the day of the execution, the condemned were transported to the Tyburn Gallows from Newgate in a horse-drawn open cart. The distance between Newgate and Tyburn was approximately 3 miles, but due to the streets often being crowded with onlookers, the journey could last up to 3 hours. A usual stop of the cart was at the Bowl Inn in St Giles, where the condemned were allowed to drink strong liquors or wine. Having arrived at Tyburn, the condemned found themselves in front of a crowded and noisy square. The wealthy paid to sit on the stands erected for the occasion, in order to have an unobstructed view. Before the execution, the condemned were allowed to say a few words. The authorities expected that most of the condemned, before their death, before commending their own souls to God, would admit their guilt. It is reported that the majority of the condemned did so. A noose was then placed around the neck and the cart pulled away, leaving them hanging. Death was not immediate. The fight against strangulation could last for 3/4 of an hour. Instances of pickpocketing have been reported in the crowds of executions, a mockery for the deterrent effect of capital punishment, which, at the time, was considered proper punishment for theft. Sites of public executions were significant gathering places, and executions were public spectacles. Scholars have described the executions at Tyburn as carnivalesque occasions in which the normative message intended by the authorities is reappropriated and inverted by an irreverent crowd that found them a source of entertainment as well as conflict. This analysis is supported by the presence of shouting street traders and food vendors and the erection of seating for wealthier onlookers. Additionally, a popular belief held that the hand of an executed criminal could cure cancers, and it was not uncommon to see mothers brushing their child's cheek with the hand of the condemned. I spoke at the beginning of the River Tyburn. The River Tyburn was a stream in London. Its main successor sewers emulate its main courses, but it resembled the Colne in its county of Middlesex, in that it had many distributaries. It ran from South Hampstead through Marylebone and Soho, and then ran through St James Parish and Green Park to meet the tidal Thames at 4 sites, grouped into pairs. These pairs were near Whitehall Stairs, east of Downing Street, and by Thornley Street between Millbank Tower and Thames House. Its much smaller cousin, the Tyburn Brook, was a tributary of the Westbourne, in turn the next Thames tributary. The charter of AD 959 appears to mention the river, which it refers to as Meerflirt, which probably translates as boundary stream, a suggestion reinforced by context with the river forming the western boundary of the estate described. Before it was cultivated and then taken as a sewer, this 7-mile brook rose from the confluence of 2 streams in the hills of South Hampstead, as the broad ravine between Borough and Primrose Hills. Its main source was the Shepherd's Well near Fitzjohn's Avenue, Hampstead. At Green Park, the water split into distributaries, creating Thorney Island on which Westminster Abbey was built. These again split in 2, one in the then lower, thus typically spring-tide immersed bank, where Whitehall sits, and the other close to Vincent Square, Pimlico. Most of its catchment drains into soakways in gravel soil, in turn into the chalk water table beneath, or into the 2-type and hybrid type of drainage set out in Victorian London. Gray's Antique Centre near the junction of Oxford Street and Davis Streets claims that the body of the water, which can be seen in an open conduit in the basement of his premises, is part of the Tyburn. It's undoubtedly close to the course of the stream. The stream south followed Lansdowne Row, the north-east of Curzon Street, then Whitehorse Street, and a pedestrian avenue of Green Park to the front of the gates of Buckingham Palace, at the foot of Constitution Hill, from where one mouth used the depression of St James's Park Lake, and Downing Street to reach 2 closely paired mouths. A third distributary is untraced in the building lines and street layout to Thornley Street close to Lambeth Bridge, whilst a 4th distributary forms the natural collect for a 3-metre sewer pipe, King's Scholars Pond Sewer, to the Victoria Embankment Interceptor, saving it from discharging just west of Vauxhall Bridge. So, I hope you've enjoyed our look at the historic Tyburn area of London. For some reason, there is nothing more popular in London history than executions, and this area certainly had its fair share of them. Whatever podcast service you use to listen to this, please do subscribe to get updates on new shows, and also please leave us some feedback. As mentioned at the start of this podcast, this was a request. So, if you would like to let me know of any places you'd like us to feature in future podcasts, you can let me know through our website, www.londonvisited.co.uk, by emailing me directly on londonvisited@gmail.com, or contacting us on Twitter and Instagram on @LondonVisited, or Facebook on @TheLondonVisited. Thanks for listening, and really hope you enjoyed our podcast, and we'll see you very soon on the next one. Bye!